Hello, friends. I'm going to talk about what happened at the White House. I know you have probably now heard it a million times, but I do want to share with you what I think about the whole thing. It's probably not very much different from what you have heard, but I hear that a lot of people and a lot of people in the U.S. and in Europe thought that President Trump and Vice President Vance had ambushed President Zelensky. And that is what a lot of people are saying. I haven't heard that. All the opinion pieces I listen to have a different opinion, and that is my opinion too. First of all, I believe it's tomorrow that President Trump is going to address Congress. What do you think he's going to say? Um, a meeting with Putin, or the withdrawal of troops from Europe, or new tariffs, or something to do with taxes? What do you think he's going to talk about? It's probably going to be quite serious. At the same time, today, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has made a statement that he is ready to send, if necessary, to send troops together with other countries, boots on the ground, as they say, and planes on the air as part of the security guarantees demanded by President Zelensky. He said that he doesn't take this decision lightly, but the future of Ukraine is essential for British national security and for the security of the continent. Russia, he repeated, is a threat, but anyway, this will go before Parliament. In any case, I want to talk to you about what happened, and let's see if you agree with me. Most people, it is true, only saw the last 10 minutes of the meeting between Trump and Zelensky. And you will have heard in many channels that it is essential to watch the whole 50 minutes, because for the first 40 minutes, everyone is being very polite, and President Zelensky starts talking about things, and yes, but we need to have a deal, says Trump. We need to no, but we need security guarantee. We're going to talk about all that, but it's really, if you watch the whole video, you will see how there is an escalation, after which, in the last 10 minutes, basically things just got out of, you can see actually that Trump is becoming more and more, he's trying to control himself, but he is already, you can see it in his body language, that he's saying this is not going anywhere. That's it. The thing is that the reason why I think that the Americans did not ambush Zelensky is that they had everything ready there for the agreements to be signed. Okay, in another room they had the agreements and the papers and the pens ready, and then there was to be a meal, and so they listened to what was going on and what Zelensky was saying for the first 40 minutes. And it was then that they reacted. Okay, so first of all, when a head of state visits another head of state, generally, there is a few minutes, but first of all, you go in and you don't see the head of state right away. You have something to drink, you go to the bathroom. There is a period there, and then there is a few minutes for photographs, relaxed, before the cameras, you smile and so on. So this is not improvised. That is what happens always. it could be said that Trump's cabinet made a mistake in allowing the meeting to go on for too long. But Trump says at the end that yes, he was aware of that, but he wanted the American people to see it. So perhaps not. Anyway, so in the first 40 minutes, there are questions and conversations, and then it reaches that point where contradictions surface, those final moments when the whole thing explodes. You will see, if you see it, if you see the whole video, I know it's a little bit too much, it's 50 minutes, but if you watch it all, you will see that Zelensky is not the victim of an ambush. I don't think so. I think he came already with the intention to blow the whole thing up. In other words, not to sign, and he had to get out of that situation of signing. Some say, I have no idea, that perhaps he was a little bit overstimulated and couldn't perhaps control his anger or his frustration at the end. I don't know. But anyway, contradictions arise at the end, and this is the moment where Zelensky really aborts the situation, that situation that he's there to sign an agreement. The reason why he had come to Washington. There is a moment, if you look carefully, in which Trump says, okay, one last question. By this time, you can see that Trump was already rather fed up with the whole thing, what he had been hearing for the last 40 minutes. At that moment is when Vance takes the opportunity to tell Zelensky that perhaps he should be a little bit more grateful. We have always helped you. We have always supported Ukraine. We've spent a lot of money. And if you want to negotiate with someone, in this case Putin, you can't go around insulting him beforehand. Otherwise, I mean, how are you going to start a negotiation with it? The thing here, I mean, if we look at the overall picture of the thing, let us remember how the whole thing started, okay? First of all, we all know by now that it started in 2014, there was a civil war and so on, okay? But when Russia came into Ukraine, we all thought at the beginning that it was a war between Russia and Ukraine, and so Russia had invaded Ukraine. And so as time went on, and as the West became more and more involved in it, we realized, didn't we, that it was not just a war between Russia and the Ukraine, that things had happened before. There had been a coup, there had been this and that, and so we came to realize that this was really a proxy war. A proxy war, we called it, because we saw that the West, or let's be more specific, the globalists, were trying, the whole thing was about hurting Russia. And so the Ukraine, we saw more and more, the Ukraine, the poor Ukrainians were being used almost as a sacrificial lamb in order to hurt Russia. That became more and more apparent. Now, you can be on either side, but certainly the Ukraine was being used to weaken Russia, and you remember the sanctions and so on. Okay, if I were Zelensky, for example, I think I could make a point to the Americans and say, look, we acted as your proxies to weaken Russia, and I have 1 million people dead in my country. I know he doesn't admit to that. He says that 700 Russians have been killed and 70,000 Ukrainians, but that is no longer believable. Come on. About 1 million people have died. Okay, and he can say, Trump could say, well, but that wasn't me. My administration wants to do something completely different. But Zelensky could still say, yes, but it was your country, and I was doing your bidding there, and now you're pulling the rug under my feet. And what do I do now with the country destroyed and 1 million people dead? Surely, I mean, he could perhaps negotiate on that he did what he was promised by the West, and now a different president and a different administration change the whole direction. And where is he now? I mean, that is the conversation that he should involve himself in. But in any case, he didn't do that. So they began to sort of, all these contradictions, these different directions became very apparent. And so Trump says, okay, one last question, please. It had already gone on for 40 minutes. So Vance says what he says and tells him, look, if we are going to negotiate with Putin for peace, for a ceasefire at least, we cannot go around insulting him first, as President Biden did. And here is when Zelensky takes the baton, as it were, and confronts Vance straight on. And he, we are told now that he even actually insults him, mumbles the insult, and is in Russian, and it's something to do with bitch, but something else. Okay, but it sounds, we are told, much harsher in Russian than what it sounds like an SOB or whatever it is. That is a real insult, and he mumbles it in Russian because his first language is Russian. Yeah, I think he learned Ukrainian when he got elected. Apparently it's quite similar. I don't know. But his natural language is Russian. So, of course, no one picked it up there because no one understands Russian. But it really indicated that Zelensky was now willing to slap you almost, all over the place. So, because the mission that he has at that moment is that he, as he sees it, cannot allow himself to get to sign anything, that agreement, any agreement that might lead to a ceasefire. In the previous 40 minutes, all Trump talks about is to reach an agreement on making peace, ceasefire, people stop dying. He insists on that again and again. Has Trump become a pacifist? No, it's because it's in the interest of the United States, as he sees it, to stop that war. Zelensky arrived, we will talk about the reasons and so on, but Zelensky arrived, he said many things, but for example, he got, in my opinion, just a little bit too cocky, when a journalist asked him, perhaps the journalist shouldn't have asked that question, but he said, don't you have a suit? That came from a journalist. Because apparently this is important for Americans when you go to the Oval Office and the president, and there is a protocol and so on. And Zelensky said, well, yes, perhaps I will get one eventually, and probably a little bit more expensive than yours, or cheaper than yours, something like that. But he's already fighting there. Then at another time, Trump says, look, it is very difficult to negotiate with this hatred that you feel, very difficult to negotiate. I know that the other side is not very fond of you either, but it is difficult to negotiate with all these such strong feelings to come to anything. And Vance says, it continues saying, if you start insulting the other party, it is going to be impossible to negotiate anything. And then they go on to say that after all, Putin, he was in his first mandate, he was charged with having done this and that, a million things, Russia, all that, being responsible for interfering in the election. And Trump says it had nothing to do with him. He had nothing to do with him. So he went through that as well. And then eventually he gets to the point when he says, look, you have to negotiate something. There has to be a ceasefire because you have no cards left. Zelensky says, I didn't come here to play cards. Perhaps that is that, a difference in the language is not his first language, and perhaps he didn't quite understand the American colloquial expression of, you have no cards. Anyway, that is not important. But then we see Zelensky saying to Trump and to his cabinet, who know the reality of the situation. They have intelligence services there. They've been there from the very beginning, okay? So he starts telling him that what we have been hearing from the television, those who watch television, a whole thing that is really, it is not accurate. It's more like the propaganda we have been fed for the last 3 years. Come on now, okay. You cannot, that is perhaps the things that you would say to an ordinary citizen who's not up to scratch with what is happening there and believes what he hears on television. But you cannot come to the White House, to the president, the cabinet there, who have the intelligence and the reality of the situation, and tell him, things that are not accurate. They have people there. They know what is going on. So he says, what did he say? Oh yes, he says, from the very beginning, we have been alone fighting this. Of course, from 2014, we have been alone fighting this. Okay, so at least he admits, or just came out, that the war started in 2014. But, of course, Trump has to say, you were not alone. I mean, remember the Maidan and the, everything else. It was the United States that was, sending money and arms and then Europe. They were never really alone. So that never happened. You can say that to someone else, but not there. He said already we had people dying in combat. So the war started in 2014. Then he brings up the issue of the Minsk agreements, the Minsk 1 and 2, okay? And he says that it was Russia who didn't want to sign. That is, how can you possibly say that? Okay, we all know that that is not the case, please, okay? That it was Russia that breached the agreements. It says 25 times. But you cannot lie to Trump on that issue. It's too gross. I mean, he knows what happened. In any case, we can all see that meeting in 2019, Minsk 2. Okay, and he is there. There is Zelensky, and there is Putin, and there is Merkel, I believe. No, that was the first one. Macron is there anyway, and so Putin is saying that an agreement has been reached, and you can see Zelensky there laughing, sneering, because as we know, afterwards Merkel said it, and President Hollande of France saying, and the Prime Minister of the time during Minsk II also said that there was never any intention of keeping that agreement, which was very favorable at the time to Ukraine. But it was never going to be. It was just to give Ukraine time to arm and get ready and so on. And Zelensky knew it, and that is why you see him there laughing, sort of near, while Putin thinks that this is going to happen, that this is going on. So he laughs, and now he's telling President Trump that it was Russia who breached the agreements. This is nonsense, okay? You cannot come and tell the President of the United States that. Okay, so what else do I have here? Okay, so a lot of things came out. He was repeating many lies that we now know are not true. They're out in the open. So that is why it is important to actually watch the 50 minutes and how the whole thing evolved. And then he says at the end, practically threatening the U.S., he said, well, you have an ocean, but you will see at the end, you will feel it too. And this is the moment when Trump reaches the peak of his tolerance. He has been there sort of trying to stay still kind of thing. But then he says, stop right there, no, you don't know what we are going to feel, something like that. Stop right there. It's like saying, look here, fellow, you've gone a little bit too far right now, okay? So you are nobody to tell the U.S. what we are going to feel and so on. Don't you realize, and then he says, don't you realize that you are gambling with taking us all to World War III, and with the life of so many of your countrymen, the lives of so many human beings dead and so on. Okay, so what happens next is that he goes to a room. There was supposed to be a meal afterwards and so on. He goes with his people to one room, and then he's asked to leave the White House. Okay, but immediately after that, we have humiliated, I suppose, by Trump, immediately the tweets and the posts from European leaders start coming. But within the first 10 minutes, there was almost a sort of a coordinated attempt. Oh dear, poor Zelensky, humiliated by Trump, ambushed by Trump. Oh, and why do I think that this was coordinated? But not by Trump, by others. This is my conclusion anyway, or I could be mistaken, but I think there was a coordination afterwards. It's very, very strange that this gentleman comes to Washington, knowing the situation in which his country is in, knowing the need he has in some way of continuing to get the support of the U.S., which is essential so that the front doesn't collapse in 2 weeks. That's what Trump reminded him. He said, look, without our help, you would have lost in 2 weeks. And he just, yeah, that's what Putin said, 3 days. Okay, so he's almost mocking Trump. At one moment, he even tries to imitate him. So really, you have to watch the images. It's like, it's almost like a guy in pajamas coming to your house. Anyway, to tell you what you have to do. I think that he knows perfectly well that he knew that he had a mission to accomplish, an aim, an objective here. In some way, he has to bring about the situation, the non-signing of that agreement. Everything was ready, as I said, including the pens, ready to sign. Everything was ready for the signature. And he arrived with the clear intention of provoking this break and not signing. Why would that be? Okay, we'll have to look into that. Of course, we can ask ourselves, how was he so daring actually to do that? And I have to, my question immediately is, who is behind him? Who is supporting him? Who is behind all this? Who is aiding this gentleman for him to dare to allow himself the luxury of acting so crazy here? And to me is really simple. As I said, when you see that within 10 minutes after he's told to leave the White House, within 10 minutes, tweets from everywhere. It was almost cut, paste, and copy tweets from everywhere. The EU, high officials, ministers, etc., all from Europe supporting Zelensky. But hey, what's happening? Could it be that they all received at the same time Zelensky's call in 10 minutes, almost immediately? Couldn't they wait 10 minutes to reflect about what had happened, an hour to think about the consequences of all this? No, they didn't even wait 10 minutes. Started all, at the same time, in tandem, to send their tweets. Why? I think because it had been planned, because it was coordinated, because this is not improvised. Did the Americans know this? I don't think so. There was a sort of a dark and sinister maneuver, elaborated, I think, as is usually the case between London and Paris, the Rothschild axis. I call them the Rothschildren, with the objective, well, there are many objectives here, but the main one, I think, was that to prevent the signing of that agreement. Because if that agreement was signed, the next thing is to tell Putin, stop, because I have an agreement, and so now we can start negotiating a peace treaty. And this is what had to be avoided. Why? Okay, so you will see that Zelensky was constantly throughout the whole thing talking about security guarantees, yeah? Or as the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer calls it, the backstop. That is, what that means is the US continuing to provide all the means, the intelligence, all that, okay? The Ukraine actually has already signed bilateral agreements with most European countries independently. So what specifically does he want from the US then? He has signed with other countries. What are the objectives here? This black hand if that agreement is not signed, you have sabotaged the negotiation. Therefore, the war continues. Yeah. Which is what the globalist elite wants. You have to look at the fact that the globalist elite that has been in power for the last 30 years, now with Trump is changing direction. It's not that he's going to end the American empire, as it's now called, but he's more of a sovereignist, and so he wants all that, the benefits of empire, to go to the country rather than world government. Yeah, so there is a division between those in power, between the corporate elites. Okay, so because now Trump is changing direction on how the empire is going to go on. Okay, the globalists who were there in power with the Democrats and the Republicans now have taken refuge in Europe, in the European Union. Okay, in London and Paris. Britain is not in the European Union, but it doesn't matter. It's calling the shots to a large extent. So the globalist power is at the moment no longer centered in the United States, in Washington. It's now in London and Paris and Brussels. Of course, there will be many in Washington too, but they're not in power at the moment. So then Zelensky came to London, and the behavior was totally different from that in the White House. What was happening here? As I said, there is a division among the elites. There is a sector in the dominant corporate elite who understand that the world has changed. That is Trump's side. And that we must go to another type of politics, as it were, where the US will maintain its strategic advantage in a world order that we are all seeing is changing. And there is another sector, the old one, the globalist so-called one, of the dominant corporate elite too, that says no to that. Only the global elite, okay, only the one hegemon, things as they were for the last 30 years, global governance, whatever the cost. And the cost could be another European war with all that entails, to maintain that only one single dominant power. And for that, in order for that to happen, you have to destroy Russia and China and all that. Okay, so these elites are the ones that lost when the Democrats lost the election in the United States. And so now, as I said, they take refuge in Europe, as they did to a large extent, perhaps not so large, during the Trump's first mandate. They were very much in power in the city of London and in Brussels. You can see that they all went, in favor of Kamala Harris, for example, if you remember, except Orban and the usual ones. Okay. And Keir Starmer actually, we know, sent operatives to the U.S. to help with her Miss Harris election campaign. Is that interfering in the in the election of another country? Okay. Orban actually had already said something about this. He said, get ready, because when Trump comes to the presidency, everything is going to change. And he learned from Trump learned from the first mandate, certainly. Yeah, he learned something, and his cabinet now is different. And remember that France also is considered rather dangerous, because it could be, another 8 years after Trump. He's dangerous because, okay, Trump is a business dealing guy and he's a billionaire and he's a businessman and so on, but Vance understands political philosophy, as it were. He has a more intellectual sense. He comes from the very, very bottom of the social ladder. He sees things perhaps differently, or the reasons for things differently. He understands power in a different way, I think. In other words, he has a political philosophy. Trump is a practical man. Vance understands I don't know how to explain this. Political philosophy better. He showed that in Munich when he spoke there. He comes from below, from the American working class, from the Rust Belt, the deindustrialized Rust Belt, and he understands there is a huge difference. He comes from a dysfunctional family, the crisis, the unemployment. And then he also has now in the cabinet, he has Robert Kennedy. We'll see how he deals with that big pharma issue. And he has Elon Musk there. Well, he's not in the cabinet, but he's there as an advisor. And he's putting his claws in all these issues of money and corruption and billions going to, through the USAID. He's looking at the Pentagon, auditing there. He has even requested an audit of Fort Knox. He wants to see if the gold is really there. We might have some surprises here. Is the gold that's supposed to be there really there? But okay, so he wants to look into that. And he has Tulsi Gabbard coordinating all the intelligence services. Okay, so the globalists, what do all these globalists, elites want? They want to continue the war. Why? Because it's really the only thing they have to, in some way, certainly the Europeans, hide or justify or conceal the general crisis situation that Europe finds itself in. If you have to cut services, if you have to go on censoring, cut social rights, fundamental rights, eliminate winners at elections or to rig elections, as in Romania, for example, you have to have a reason, an excuse, and the war serves as an excuse. If you have to tell people that much more is to be spent on military issues, military expenses, at the expense of health and education, infrastructure development, pensions, it is because there is a war. The war is a good excuse, among other things. And so it is logical that they want to continue that war. And in that sense, they find a Trump who, because of who concentrates on U.S. interests, okay, who wants to finish the war because he wants to move on. He has other things to do, other businesses to deals to do, and so they find that they have to isolate Trump, separate Trump as if he was the plague, He's this, he's that, and so for what? To avoid his influence on European governments, because if not, European cohesion will crack, and NATO and the European Union might very well blow up, as it were. But NATO is mainly the US, is 70% of its budget is paid by the US, what it costs. Okay, so Trump is saying no to more war. The US will not send troops to Ukraine, nor is it going to guarantee the security of those troops, intelligence, etc. Okay, nor is it going to calling Article 5 of NATO. In other words, NATO has, if it doesn't do that, NATO has ceased to have a real existence. In fact, if these people want to send, in Europe, want to send troops to Ukraine, they cannot do it under the NATO mandate. There is no umbrella there. So Trump's idea, already discussed at the table with Putin, when a peace treaty is reached, that treaty has to go through the Security Council of the UN. For what? To give it validity, international legality, the stamp of legality, so that it is binding. So it has to go through the Security Council, so that if peacekeeping forces have to be sent, they would have to be, well, let's say the blue helmets, those famous blue helmets, according to a resolution that will have to be approved. And one, supposedly the blue helmets were always from neutral countries to the conflict, not from countries that are part of the conflict. So in that situation, it would make no sense for the British or French troops to be there. So what they really want, and that's why Macron and Starmer went to Washington, to convince Trump that they will provide the troops, but of course there will have to be security guarantees, as they're called, from the US. In other words, that if these troops receive a Russian attack, for example, then the US will come and intervene to save the situation. Okay, so they were prepared to tell him, we'll send the troops, don't worry. But if we are hit, then we want you to come in and save us. Well, that's fantastic, you know. It has happened before. But for that, you see, that's pretty easy, because all you don't even need to send a lot of troops. You just need to send, you don't need to send 100,000 even. You just need to send 5,000. And what do you do then? A false flag, of course. A plane drops a bomb on Ukraine, God forbid, on some French barracks, kills 100 people. Oh my God. Of course, everyone say that it was Russia, and there you are. Please, United States, come and save us. Look what they've done. Okay, so it's very easy, once you have those troops there, to get the United States, to force the United States to come in and save the situation. So the US enters the war. It has happened so many times. Yeah. It has happened in World War I. It has happened in World War II. Okay, it's especially Britain always, please come and say that Britain will do its thing, whatever. Okay, and then please come and save civilization, and the United States is brought in. Okay, so I think that Trump knows that, and that is what he is trying to avoid. Any false flag could bring the United States into the war. And so Trump is saying, no way. You want to go? Fine, but no, I will not give you these security guarantees. I will not come to save you with our troops. This is the typical trap of people who provoke a war, like the Maidan shooters, like the shooters in Benghazi, so many. To provoke a war, all you need is a false flag, the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, anything like that, Pearl Harbor. The main, we have a war set up, and Trump is saying no. They're taking us to war. They're trying to make the US enter the war actively, and no. And this is what is behind all this, I think. The globalist elite who dominate now the European governments that want to continue that war, sacrificing the poor Ukrainians. So they're willing to confront the Trump administration. In any case, okay, so Trump has given himself, I think he said 5 days, but I think he's going, as I said at the beginning, he's going to address Congress tomorrow. He's been thinking about a decision, what he's going to do. It is possible that he will unleash something, quite a blow, really. It could be, I suspend our participation in NATO. That's the end of NATO. Or 30% tariffs on European exports, because he knows what the Europeans are doing. He probably feels offended, actually. He can strike in different ways, but this is what I can glimpse from what I saw in that White House meeting, and what we saw with Zelensky's visit to London afterwards. The usual group there, not all, it wasn't representatives of the European Union, because, well, first of all, Britain is not in the European Union, but that's besides the point. But there were many in the European Union, for example, the Baltic states, who were not invited. Actually, they were quite mad at the end, because they're usually the ones, always so actively anti-Russian and so on, but they were not even invited. Callas wasn't there, and there were others. And Canada was there. Turkey was there, but not Greece, who is in NATO and in the European Union. And there are quite a few things going on now between Turkey and Greece, with planes flying well over, it's about Cyprus going. There could be some trouble there, but anyway, Turkey was there. Okay, so of course Macron was there. Okay, so Prime Minister Starmer received him, lots of hugs, okay, it was really a message to Trump. You can see that. And probably Trump took note of that. Perhaps he has a blacklist, okay. But the appearance of Prime Minister Starmer with Zelensky lasted about 4 minutes. They took a few photos. All is well, thank you. The next day, I believe he saw the king, but just a few minutes. And okay, but he took £3 billion on loan. So it was a kind of a sweet meeting, got 3 billion out of it. Everything was prepared. Yeah, okay. So I don't know. One more thing. Between Zelensky's arrival in London, from the moment he arrived in London and his meeting with Prime Minister Starmer, from the moment he arrived and when he met the Prime Minister, there was about 6 hours. Okay, so perhaps he used 6 hours to sleep. The man probably needed it. I have heard some comments saying that perhaps he had other meetings in the city. Who knows? It could be that they were waiting also to see if there was to be a reaction, immediate reaction from the White House before having that meeting. Trump spoke just a few little things, but there was no reaction. There has been silence from the White House since then, which is worrying, really. Because the thing that you expect is for Trump to go on and on, you know, his media thing and so on. No, just that thing and then nothing. Silence, which is not the norm, including Musk. So we'll see what happens. Now, I want to talk about this rare earth minerals thing, because this is, I think I talked a little bit about it in a different video, but I want to tell you why they are so important. Let me get a glass of water here. Okay, so the path that Trump took in trying to reach a global and strategic agreement with Putin. Remember in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, it wasn't just about Ukraine. In Riyadh, they talk about many more things. We are finding this out little by little. There have been a few leaks and so on. They discussed also the fact that Trump wanted to buy also rare earth minerals from Russia. And therefore there were they talked about some strategic economic issues. Why so much interest with this little issue of rare earth minerals? I tell you, in the agreement that was to be signed in the White House, that Zelensky did not sign at the end, they were going to agree to $500 billion worth of these minerals. I think, because you see, Zelensky, who had been the first one to say, you know, we have all these rare earth minerals and so on. He was the first to talk about it. Okay, but he wanted people to give him more aid in exchange for that, whereas Trump was saying, no, we're going to have them in lieu of what we have already spent, on what we have already given you. In other words, looking back, not looking forward. And he came up with the figure of around 500 billion at one point, he says. I think he's counting the help from 2014, to tell you the truth. But anyway, from an economic viewpoint, it was profitable. But also, there in the agreement was something about gas pipelines that would pass through the Ukraine, which would be controlled by North American companies. Of course, if you have a ceasefire treaty and a peace treaty is signed, the sanctions on Russian oil and gas would be lifted. And if they are lifted, they have to continue buying it because they have no other option, buying Russian gas and oil. only that now they will pay Russia the price that the Americans and the Russians agreed to, but the Europeans will pay the price that the American companies set for them because they have the pipelines. Okay, even a North American company has already offered to buy the Nord Stream, such as it is, and fix it and repair it. All this is to say that from an economic point of view, there were issues much more profitable, actually, than the rare earth minerals, okay, which, remember Putin saying, quantify, quantify. What does he mean, quantify? Because, you see, most of them are in the eastern part of Ukraine, which is now Russia, not in the western part of Ukraine. And now we are hearing that he had already agreed to sell them to the UK. You remember when Starmer agreed to so many billions every year for 100 years? I don't know whether it had something to do with that, but apparently, I don't know that this is true. I haven't, but this is what is being commented, that he had already agreed to sell them to Britain. And now we are hearing that he had already agreed to sell them to Paris, to France. So I don't know whether he's been selling these rare earth minerals to just about the EU, to just about everybody. And we don't even know how much of it is there because a lot of it is burned. And anyway, so anyway, okay. Let me see. So the issue with the rare earth minerals is also a strategic one, because the number one country that has rare earths, above all, who knows how to use them to obtain an optimum thing out of them, knows how to use them strategically in the technology industry, the number one country is China. So the surplus rare earths minerals that Russia has, and he's going to have a lot, he's not going to sell them to China. China does not need to buy rare earth minerals. It wouldn't make sense for them to sell them to China. So, because it is the first producer in the world. So it will want to sell it to other countries. So, but what other countries have industries that need such specific rare minerals and money to buy them? It wouldn't be perfidious Albion, would it? So I'm seeing that perhaps the UK is promoting all this hassle in Europe. Yes. Let's go to war and so on. Okay, so that then the United States want the United States the security guarantees to come into the war, but then it is the UK that might end up with those rare minerals rather than the United States. But in any case, I'm just speculating here, but if Russia now has a buyer, the US, let's say, Russia will start working things out, making numbers, adding, multiplying, and they will realize that this is rather good business. And why does the US need rare earth minerals. First of all, because it doesn't have it. It has many other things, gas, oil, and so on, but it doesn't have rare earths. Because also China has already cut off the United States, the cut off the export, not completely, but a lot, the export to the United States of some of those rare earth minerals because of the tariffs imposed on China. Okay, and the US needs those rare earth minerals strategically, not just for technological development, which they do, but also, ladies and gentlemen, for the advanced development of weapons, the weapons system of the military industrial complex. If they don't have, or they have a scarcity of these rare earths, there is no such development, and the US does not have rare earth minerals. And if they don't get them from Russia, even China would have a strategic advantage over the US armed forces. So do you realize how important it is for the United States to have these rare earths? So, what I find amazing is that, well, not really, not amazing. You do expect it, really, after a while. For example, people in the streets, those poor souls demonstrating in, I think it's the Vice President J.D. Vance's his hometown, demonstrating pro-Ukraine and so on. I don't know whether they realize that exactly what they're doing, because you could be demonstrating, you think, for Ukraine, but really for the UK to have those rare earth minerals rather than the US, who is going to need them. So perhaps people should just understand a little bit better. Perhaps just go home if you're not totally sure. If you don't realize that you're being propagandized. But in all this, do you see the tightrope that Trump is walking here? And it's not so much the commercial volume or the profitability it may have, the gas and the oil, it's much more, but it is the strategic factor that it represents. And that is why the issue of rare earth minerals, the agreement about these rare earth, this is why it is so important. It has strategic importance for the US. So now perhaps Trump reaches an agreement with Putin, because the more Putin advances in the war, the more territory it takes, the more earth minerals also he will have. Probably most of it. The less that the Ukraine will have. So let's have a ceasefire. Let's stop this war. Zelensky can't bring himself to accept that he has lost. I can understand the psychological impact of that, but at one point you have to be realistic. I know that it's easier said than done, but there is a point at which, if you continue, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Like everything else in life, perhaps at some point you have to cut your losses. The losses are great. He will have to do a lot of explaining, obviously. Okay, so Trump is a practical guy, not an ideological guy. Once all legal conditions have been studied to eliminate or stop all military aid to Ukraine, he could actually even stop the restoration of the electrical system that America is doing now in Ukraine. We didn't know that, but they're actually repairing the whole electrical grid thing. Satellite issues in the next few days. If there is no repair to what has happened, if there is no solution, an arrangement on this, we could see that the US begins to dramatically withdraw support from Kiev. So what kind of arrangement, perhaps you ask? Well, the arrangement would involve signing, accepting the conditions that Trump asks of Zelensky, and consequently it will be a big slap in the face to the entire Euro-globalist elite that is trying to keep the war going. This is a very difficult situation here. Is this feasible at all? Well, seeing what we are seeing, I think everything and anything is possible to happen. The situation is very delicate for all parties, for the Europeans, for Zelensky, for Ukraine, for the White House. Actually, the one who's probably much calmer about all this and has more control of the board, so to speak, is actually Putin. I don't think he's so calm that he's just there eating popcorn. After all, his country is at war. But he, in Trump's language, he has the cards. Any of the options taken, he has already got his plans worked out for each. I think we can see it. They have given them to him ready-made, hence the tranquility. As Trump said, contradicting the whole media people, all those people who, anyway, the media, listen here, the war, he was telling him, the war, you are losing the war. You have no cards left. He blurted that out to him almost. You be realistic, you have no cards left. They, the Russians, are winning. Perhaps he was actually going as far as he could, saying, we have lost. But he cannot obviously say that. But the Russians are winning. You have no cards left. As well, the ceasefire may not suit Zelensky very well either, because if there is a ceasefire, that means that martial law will have to be lifted, which means elections, which means whatever, the whole thing might be over. In which case, what you have is all of Putin's objectives met. As to what he's going to do about NATO, I'm sure we'll find out. Okay, I'll leave it here. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.